So as we begin, welcome to everyone who's here tonight for this event. And thank you, Pastor Singleton, for calling these great conversations together year after year. It really is exciting to be together and to build on the kinds of relationships that we've created over the years. Um, I would like to start by thanking Matthew McDonald, who's one of our amazing youth from FCC, for being our Zoom tech this evening. If you have any questions or problems that Matthew might be able to help you with regards to the Zoom, just please text him in the chat. It truly is good to be together tonight during these cold and stressful winter months. Um, my name is Reverend Ann Roloski, and I am the senior minister at First Congregational Church in Montclair. This conversation is called "The Courage to Be Community: The Sacredness of a Shared Life." And it seems especially important to talk about community while we are so separated and relying so heavily on virtual technology. It seems really more important than ever that we learn new ways to strengthen the bonds between us. And I greatly appreciate the topic, defending our fragile democracy, um, because uh, that has proven to be so true. Our democracy is indeed fragile. And I think we've been feeling that more these past um, few weeks and months, and certainly these days, than we have in a long time. And I think that one of the pillars of our democracy that's been whittled away most dramatically is our ability to live in community, in genuine community, where we come together and solve problems across our differences. Uh, our time together tonight is brief. We'll have just, under 90 minutes. So we will only just scratch the surface of this important conversation. But maybe we can leave here with some encouragement in our souls and some ideas that will strengthen us. But I'd like us to start together with a moment of prayer. So if you will take a deep breath and then release it, and with it, release whatever um, tensions, burdens, worries you may be carrying, and let us pray. Gracious God, you call us together tonight from various places, various homes, various walks of life, uh, various days, but you call us together to remember what it is that unites us, that we are created in your image, that we are made to be together, that it is in our differences that we see a multiplicity of who you are. And so we're grateful for the chance to be together. We're grateful for the technology that allows it to happen. And we're also grateful for all the ways in which you hold us tight, even as we are separated. And so we thank you for all who are gathered tonight for this call, and we pray this in your many names. Amen. Now, the origins of this series is as a scripture study. That was how it began. And it can be so illuminating to see our current issues through the lens of our sacred stories, but sometimes it can feel like a bit of a stretch to find a scripture passage that reflects the topic at hand. Because you see, the ancient communities who wrote our scriptures were many things, but they were not a democracy. And the values of active participation in government would not have been imaginable to them. But they do speak about the values of human diversity and the different gifts that we bring when we come together. They speak about the tensions present whenever two or more folks gather. And they speak about God's presence being found whenever we come together with a shared purpose and to love one another. And so I'd like to open with a reading from the Apostle Paul, who spent his life establishing and supporting faith communities in the early Christian church. Now, we know from his letters that these new little churches were anything but harmonious, and some things never change about churches, and that Paul was constantly mediating conflicts from folks who saw their mission together differently. But he was also a master at cutting to the chase and identifying those habits and insights that help us appreciate our common lives within our diversity. So I'd like to begin our time together sharing this first letter of Paul to this little community in Corinth, chapter 12, verses 12 to 27. This may be familiar to some of you. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one spirit we are all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of the one spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them, as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. And so God has composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. So let's hold that beautiful metaphor of the body being many parts as a lens as we move into our discussion this evening. And I'd like to start us off with some questions because I happen to love questions actually more than I love answers. So these questions I'm just throwing out, they're going to be hypothetical just to kind of get our mental juices flowing about the topic. You'll notice that I called this conversation the courage to be community. Why does it take courage these days to come together and create a healthy and robust communal life? Why does it feel so risky at times, so dangerously political? Speaking of politics, how can we reframe politics from a zero-sum game of winners and losers, and instead reclaim it as something that's seen through the eye of the heart, something that's seen at times through a broken heart, but one that celebrates what it means to live as human beings together? My inspiration for this conversation comes from the work of Parker Palmer. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's a Quaker spiritual teacher and writer and organizer, and he spent 7 decades embracing the messy miracle of this experiment we call democracy. After the rise of the Tea Party in 2010, Palmer was dismayed by the increasing polarity within our politics. And he wrote the book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, Creating a Politics Worthy of the Human Spirit. As we look back at the divisions in 2010, they seem actually quite mild compared to what we're dealing with today, but I think they contain the seeds of our current situation. The trick to maintaining a democracy, Palmer tells us, is learning how to hold seeming opposites in tension with one another, a creative tension, a life-giving tension, something that lets new and meaningful realities and communities emerge. Politics, as Palmer writes, is the ancient and honorable human endeavor of creating a community in which the weak as well as the strong can flourish, love and power can collaborate, and justice and mercy can have their day. You'll notice those tensions that he holds together: love and power, justice and mercy, weak and strong. Understood this way, the enemy of politics is fear. Fear of each other, fear of change, fear of the unknown, and the agent of politics is courage, which comes from the Latin root word cor, which means heart. Good politics takes heart. And good politics can also involve heartbreak. So much of our relations with each other right now feel frayed, cracked, or even broken. We've been struggling with entrenched systemic racial injustice, growing economic disparity, lack of access to health care, despair over failing businesses and lost wages. And that's just been ever more revealed in the COVID epidemic. And because of that pandemic, we cannot even come together and work through these issues one-on-one in the same room as we used to. Our distance from each other can make our attempts to heal these tensions impossible. One of the insights that Palmer writes that has struck with me during these difficult times, and it's one that my first congregational church community will find very familiar. I find myself going back to it time and again as we talk about difficult things. Palmer describes two primary ways in which he says a heart can break. When living through trauma or tragedy or injustice, one way to respond to that heartbreak is to let our hearts shatter open, right? To shatter apart in anger or grief so that they explode into thousands of sharp shards that can rip through all those they have in contact with. I think some of us are familiar with that experience. The heartbreak in us creates heartbreak in others. And so the damage is magnified and let loose, and a cycle of heartbreak begins. But Palmer tells us there is another way that we can let our hearts break. When faced with life's tragedy or trauma, we can allow our hearts to break open, becoming wider and larger, more supple, creating more room within them to hold the heartbreak of others. You see, folks who allow their hearts to break open like that are able to relate to others who are grieving, and they can cultivate deeper compassion and connection, and ultimately community with others who have had their hearts broken as well. A heart broken open allows our humanity to shine through that crack. And it's in our shared humanity that we can find and develop the courage to be community, even in divisive times. And that's what we've come to talk about together tonight. How can we create communities of the heart in which every person can thrive, where our challenges and differences don't create anger or hostility, but invite creativity and collaboration? So Parker Palmer he identifies 5 habits of the heart that we need to cultivate together in order to sustain a democracy. And I'm going to ask Matthew if he will screen share those 5 habits of the heart so we can take a look at those together. Okay. The first one is to understand that we are, in fact, all in this together. The second one is to develop an appreciation for the value of otherness, to learn from our differences, to see it as a strength and not a weakness. The third way is to cultivate the ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. How can we problem solve in ways that don't cancel each other out, but develop the ability to hold 2 realities at one time, even if they might seem to be paradoxical? For very often there is more than one side to any given issue. One of the things we need to cultivate is to generate a sense of personal voice and agency. We need to develop confidence in our viewpoint and our ability to express it. So we need to learn how to practice saying what we mean and being able to share it with one another. And finally, strengthening our capacity to create community. That is one of the most important aspects, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So Matthew, if you can unshare the screen, we'll just hold those thoughts together as we continue. Those are his 5 strengths that we need to cultivate in order to sustain democracy. And while each of these is worthy of a whole series unto themselves, and I'd love to do that sometime, it's the last one that we will focus on tonight. Since this is a gathering largely of people of faith, we are not going to be centering our conversations necessarily in history lessons or civics lessons, although be forewarned, I will touch and do a little history. But we'll be looking to our own stories, personal and communal and faith stories that might give us some insights into those questions, into those habits of the heart. Um, and perhaps in the process, we'll tap into courage together so that we can meet some of the challenges that we are facing. One of the things that I'd like to start with is a little bit of background um, about how our American culture uh, deals with tension and sort of how we have gotten to this point. Um, I believe that to be an American is to hold the tension of living as individuals within community, of reconciling what we might call my story, your personal story, within our larger story. And asking ourselves always, how can we lift up the values of both? Again, that sort of holding them in tension, that internal paradox. There is a famous quote from Rabbi Hillel the Elder, who was teaching holding community 2,000 years ago, that rather crystallizes, I think, this tension of my story within our story. And the quote is that he asked his students, if I am not for myself, who is for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? I think these are the questions that every community wrestles with. Franciscan priest Richard Rohr reminds us that the modern and postmodern world is the first period in history where a large number of people have been allowed to have their own story, where they've been allowed to take their private lives and personal identities very, very seriously. And it's a significant movement into individuation. And it's a wonderful development for humanity. But there's also a fragility and a diminishment if my story is all we have. When we use our own feelings and opinions for our reference point for everything, then we hold to the very smallest circle of meaning in our lives. And we create what Father Rohr calls the false self. And those false selves are not challenged or held accountable to larger values or questions of responsibility. They're cut off from a larger shared story. And so we become frightened and insecure, prone to victimhood. And we are ripe for an authoritarian leader, rather, who plays on our fears. I think we might be able to see where my story, an obsession with our own personal stories, can lead us not to have to develop the kind of accountability to one another where we can see authoritarianism on the rise. Our glorification of the individual goes deep in our country's history. Ours is a nation that prides itself on rugged individualism, which I think in many ways was a response to having so little agency and self-determination when we were controlled by the British monarch. The other early European immigrants came from similarly oppressive societies, and the draw of America was a chance to strike out on one's own and choose one's own destiny. Our wide open spaces of frontier land were invitations to carve out a life for oneself that seemed limited only by our own resourcefulness. But let's be clear, there's a lot about this narrative that is a myth. Individual achievement almost always depends on shared resources and community structure and the support of others. No one is an island. And equally important to note, this invitation to chart one's own destiny was not open to everyone. The ability of one group to do so came at the expense of enslaved and indigenous peoples who had their agency stricken from them. And that is a big part of the tension that we hold in America today. It's a defining part of our tension, reconciling our early story of exploitation and slavery with what we saw as the promise of America. But if we take that promise as an aspiration for the sake of this conversation, the quest of individuals to realize their own unique destiny is important and it's noble and it's even sacred. But it can be taken to a place where our own personal goals and dreams compete with one another. And we find ourselves not only in tension, but in conflict. So the question becomes, how can we hold that tension creatively and move from my story to our story in a way that enriches our lives, both personally and communally. Now, here's where the little history lesson comes in. One of the things that made our country unique in its founding was observed by the 18th century French historian Alexis de Tocqueville. In the early days of the Republic, he came to the US from France to document the phenomenon that was emerging, which was the first political democracy in millennia. But, de Tocqueville saw a danger in this particular revolutionary American character that would be a threat to this young democracy. He was particularly concerned with the side of American individualism, which, as he said, disposes each citizen to isolate himself from others and withdraw into a circle of family and friends, focusing just on their needs and abilities, forming the habit of thinking of themselves in isolation and imagining their whole destiny is in their own hands. That was de Tocqueville's observation. He saw that as a flaw in our great American individualism. See, the greater the tendency towards individualism, the weaker our communal fabric, and the more vulnerable we are to what de Tocqueville called despotic power. In other words, we need to need each other. And we go stronger by hearing different ideas and being exposed to different practices. We become more resourceful and creative when we solve problems together, learning from each other and seeing issues from all sides. But de Tocqueville also saw that we had within us the antidote for the individualism that was cropping us all around us. He marveled at the numerous civic and voluntary organizations that brought people together around a common goal, that prized the free exchange of ideas, that taught people how to debate, compromise, and hold tensions together. He called these groups voluntary associations. And those are the places, the organizations where people come together to wrestle with questions and problems. And when in Montclair, we have a lot of them. There's a town hall meetings, civic groups like the libraries, PTA, historic societies, advocacy and organizing groups, and congregations are all examples of these kind of voluntary associations. These are the places where we practice how to be a democracy. Tonight, for example, right now, with all of you here on the screen, is an example of building community through a voluntary association. Our congregations, through which maybe we got the link to show up for this conversation. This very forum is a prime example of those kinds of groups. In fact, they were the first of these groups to exist in America, congregations. The Congregational Church, which is the denomination that I serve, also was the town meeting hall, the social service agency, and often the school. And it was designed around a cooperative congregational polity where decision making was shared among the people. And again, among white men, at least. But it was a start in learning how to wrestle through problems together rather than living under the thumb of the monarch. And I think many of us join congregations and other civic organizations as a form of community life today because we crave it as human beings. So just being here tonight, engaging this conversation is an act of defending democracy. It's an act of strengthening community because you're practicing what it is to listen to different viewpoints. And so we're going to do that now. Tonight is just not going to be a lecture by me, but a chance for all of us to tell stories to each other and learn a little bit from each other, because that's where the real wisdom is found. And so what I'd like to do at this point is we're going to divide into randomly created breakout groups. And I'd like to keep them a little bit small. I'd like to keep them at about 4 people each, so that we can share from some of each other's experiences to get into a real conversation. I'm hoping that our groups will be randomly mixed with folks from some of these different communities so that we can actually hear some stories that maybe we don't know already from others whose lives are slightly different from ours. So what I might do after I create the random breakout groups is, forgive me, I might do a little social engineering to mix things up a little bit. So I'm first going to share with you what it is I'd like you to talk about. And then I'm going to divide you into the breakout rooms, and I will put the question in the chat so you'll know what you're talking about. I'd like you to take a moment with your small group And think back to when you were growing up, or maybe when you were just a young adult. And think about some of the most memorable experiences that you had in creating a community that was about solving a problem or working toward a common goal. This could be something at school, it could be something that you came together to work on in the community that was an issue that various people believed in, but it came from different walks of life. Could be a town hall meeting, could be the PTA, could be any number of things. And I want you to think about that memorable experience you had uh, creating community where some of your ideas were challenged, where you had to practice how to talk with one another. And think about what made it difficult, what made it rewarding, and did you feel that it took courage to participate in that community? So I want you to, think back to early experiences in creating community and talk amongst yourselves about what was challenging, what was rewarding, and whether it felt like you needed a little courage in order to be able to do it. So we have looks like roughly 40 participants. So we're going to break up into 10 rooms. That should be nice and easy. And we're going to have about 15 minutes for this conversation. And then we're going to come back together again and share a little bit about what we talked about. I hope that when folks were sharing together, it might have prompted some memories of uh, perhaps formative community in your younger lives that kind of taught you what it was to work together to create a common project. Um, and I'd love if people were willing and able to share a little bit, something that they'd like to bring up that came to them, or something that their group discussed about some of the challenges that they might have experienced trying to create community across diverse lines uh, uh, when you were doing that. And I know we've got, like almost 40 people on this screen, and we can't have everyone unmuting and talking at once, but I know that folks can raise their hands. I think that's a possibility. Um, Either through you can unmute yourself. And I see Phyllis Critchlow raising her hand. Is that right, Phyllis? So, Phyllis, I'll invite you to unmute yourself, and you can share a little bit about what you discussed. There you go.
Well, I remembered something else that is pretty short. It's kind of fun, but one Saturday before church, I watched the Beverly Hillbillies. Everybody remember Beverly? Well, I went to church and the sermon was about how we are creating community when we're not aware of it. And I had everybody to stand up to sing the theme song to the Beverly Hillbillies. And all I had to do was say, "Come listen to a story about a man named JJ." And we rang out. It was so wonderful. This diverse crowd. We probably were all in our 40s, maybe, and 50s, but um, different, it was diverse, like First Congregational. And we all knew the words. This is from the 60s. It was great. That was one of my favorite memories. Thank you for that question.
Well, it is amazing what cultural things can bind us together across very disparate lines. There is no doubt about that. Um, and they can sometimes make us feel a little bit more united than maybe we would normally feel in some of our own little silos. Um,
Mhm.
Anyone else? Let's see. Floyd raised a hand. Floyd, would you?
Thank you. To that very point that you just made, one of the comments in the group that I was in had to do with how wonderful it was to hear the gospel preached from so many different perspectives by having actually a large number for a period of time of guest ministers coming to the pulpit to share the gospel with the congregation. And they were from various walks of life, whether they be gay, straight, black, white, whatever they happen to be. but to hear the gospel preached from their perspectives, and it was how wonderful it was for the congregation to have that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the real blessings sometimes when a congregation is in between their settled pastors or when a pastor goes on sabbatical, can be those voices, those other voices that come in to the conversation. No matter how much you rightfully love your settled pastor, having those different voices come in and having an opportunity. I remember hearing in the history of Montclair, certainly in some of the churches like my church and Central Presbyterian and others who were full big white Protestant churches in the summer, apparently they would practically empty out. And I guess everybody went to New Hampshire or something was what I was told. God went to New Hampshire in the summer from Montclair. And what they used to do is that each Sunday the churches would rotate hosting worship for those who stayed behind. And so people within the Protestant, Reformed Protestant community, so that would be, Presbyterian, maybe Methodist, United Church of Christ, they would just go to the different churches and hear different preaching. And I think that was a community building experience that people could bring it across lines.
It's really a thing out of the box.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Anyone have any experiences of some real challenges um, in some of their experiences of trying to create community um, across diverse lines? Anything that didn't turn out quite so unifying, or anything that felt like people had to take a courageous stand in the process of trying to create authentic community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, is there anyone raising a hand? I'm not doing so well looking at all the different faces here. Not so much, huh? Anything else come up for folks then, whether it was a challenge or whether it was a reward? What was
Heather was raising her hand?
Oh, Heather, I'm sorry. Please
Mm-hmm.
unmute yourself. I didn't see you
No,
there.
that's okay. I told the story in high school. We had a tradition, and your junior and senior year in the spring, we had what we call class night for 2 nights, a Friday and a Saturday night. And the classes came together and you picked a theme. Ours was Cowboys the first night and Arabian Nights the senior year. And it was a competition to see which class was the better class. And we had skits and they had gymnastics and basketball games and just all kinds of events going on. So the challenge was that you had a class made up of, if you've all remember your high school years, the audiovisual guys and the jocks and the cheerleaders and the nerds and the drama group and the people that were involved on student council. You had all these individual cliques who usually just kind of stayed by themselves, had to get together and come together and plan these events. And it was always a challenge for the committee to get everybody involved and working together. Our class did it so well that we actually won both junior and senior year. But it was an interesting experience of taking all these very diverse people and getting them to work together for the class, because everybody in the class had to take part. You were not allowed to exclude anybody. So it was a bit of a challenge, but it could be fun, but it was a challenge.
Absolutely, I can see how that would be. And the practice of trying to bring people together who have different skills to work toward a common goal. We all tend to be, I think, very siloed these days into our own communities with our own viewpoints, even our own skill sets, which is more and more possible the way we can kind of customize, I think, our social lives. There's less of kind of the public spaces where people just come together because you haven't necessarily handpicked this community of people, but you're all together in this public space trying to work towards something. And sometimes it's not even a real overt common goal. I think about showing up at the farmers market, or I think about the push to create outdoor public spaces within our communities, shutting down streets and having concerts, or having opportunities for people to have street fairs and things. You find yourself in conversation with, standing in line with folks who you might not normally choose to be with. Even something like the grocery store aisle or the post office, um, the shopping mall. Those are public spaces where you find yourselves interacting with people whose only goal is to buy a pair of tennis shoes together, but you're actually put together. And I think about the ways that our online world is eliminating those kinds of public spaces and those opportunities for chance meetings and interactions with people. I mean, especially now during COVID, and that's kind of where I'd like to move to, is some of the challenges of being community during a pandemic. I think about how, we shop almost entirely online. These days we can order our stamps online. We can order a movie to come directly to our television set. We have an Uber driver bring us our dinner. We don't have the opportunities for even the casual interactions that put us in community with each other, um, in ways where conversations can start and friendships can grow. I think about public parks when you have children, and the way that your child starts to play with the kid who's also on the swings, and next thing you know, you're standing next to some parents talking. And the only thing you may have in common is you both showed up in the same park at the same time with kids the same age, but you are practicing what it is to create community. And I do worry a bit about how very siloed and very customized and curated our lives are these days, where we hardly have to interact with each other anymore. And I think that was a trend that was uh, certainly starting well before COVID, but it feels like the pandemic has kind of put it on overdrive, in that many of us have defaulted to, working through screens to do the things we need to do, ordering, without ever seeing a sales clerk, or without ever running into anybody at the store, being able to take care of everything from grocery shopping to, office supplies. Um, I think it is, uh, I think it's a challenge for continuing to develop the kind of skills that we need to learn how to be comfortable in the company of each other when when we're strangers, when we don't know each other. And community at its very basic is sort of strangers coming together in a common space, in a common place. I'm wondering if folks have experienced um, that kind of challenge too. Maybe you used to be part of a civic group that isn't meeting anymore. And if anyone has any experiences of what it's been like to try and um, keep community going in some of these spaces where you can't be together anymore. Yes, Allison.
So, I'm a theater artist and a teacher. So, obviously, this format is a challenge for theater. And part of my absolute favorite aspect of theater is that communal catharsis that you get. I find it so, transformative. Um, and it's such a big loss for me that I can't go to see a play. Even like the public park plays that like our community theater Shakespeare plays, are going to New York City. The last play I saw was Slave Play, which I don't know if anyone knows that play, but I sat in the theater and just like cried when the lights went down. And I I feel like those communal artistic spaces and public spaces where you get people in a room together to experience a story together and feel it, like even concerts, right? Um, it's such a loss. And as a teacher, I've tried to put on multiple virtual productions. We put on one last year, and I kind of did it as a last hurrah for some of the seniors who felt an immense sense of loss by their senior year. Their musical was literally canceled like the night it was supposed to open. And if any of you are theater people, or especially high school drama kids, oh my gosh, the absolute devastation of that. So I tried to put on a play, and it was relatively successful, but unfortunately, the only way it worked was to do monologues. And so I was working one-on-one with kids and recording monologues on a screen, and we compiled it. And I thought it would turn out really good. And I was like, okay, as a club, let's everybody have like an opening night viewing party. And I was like, everyone get dressed up. It'll be like the Oscars. I literally cracked out my old prom dress. Like, I tried to make it like a huge event. And so many kids who were even in the production didn't show up to go watch it together. And then again, I tried this fall to do a play, and it just was like dragging the kids to the end with filming, because it's just not the same as being in person with each other during the rehearsal process, crying, laughing, making inside jokes, all of these things. Like, it's not like it's not like we never joked, but it just, you don't have the time and like the space together. And I'm realizing that that's something that I don't know how to get back, or we're gonna have to like slowly learn how to cope without that for the time being, which is like heartbreaking. So yeah, that's a big perspective, like a lens that I have, I guess, as a theater artist and an educator, just like that loss of an art form, at least temporarily, and I'm afraid of how it's going to come back. Like, so that's something that's interesting, like, because now everything's becoming like Broadway HD. Let's watch a filmed production of Hamilton on Disney Plus. Like, these people are, as much as that's accessible for people, like economically, because Hamilton was expensive, and Lord knows I did not get to see it, but I'm also worried that people are going to make like Peter Pan lives on NBC rather than come to see the play with people in the room. So
and
that's
at what
something.
cost to sort of our ability, especially for young people, to develop the kind of empathy, the kind of reading of body language, the sharing of our human energy together, in a shared space. Those are all such important developmental experiences for young people, and the kind of collaborating and spontaneous bonds that form when you're
And
in
problem
space.
solving,
The
like
problem solving, which is a huge part of of community building, is bringing each person's piece of the puzzle right together to solve the problem. I think a lot of teachers and parents are concerned about what this year has meant for our young people, and I think about athletes as well, similar to theater productions. All of that kind of collaboration and teamwork that you learn together in real time and space, and that's not happening now. And those are the building blocks, I think, for community, for knowing how to operate as an adult in community. I see that Elle Miller has their hand up. You could unmute yourself, and if you would like, put yourself on the screen.
Hi.
Hello there.
Most recently, I work at Rutgers University, and I work in a library. And so usually I have 30 to 35 students that I interact with on a daily basis. But now I've lost the sense of community that we have, because I do taco day, and I would do soup day, and I would make presents for them when they graduated, and we haven't had that. And I'm doing virtual work study where we don't see each other. I put up topics for the assignments for them to do, and we really don't have any interaction at all. And I miss the community, and I'm sure they do too, because they help each other, they support each other, they talk to each other. I mean, and they're really there for each other, and they don't have that opportunity to do that now. And we're just waiting. I don't know what that's going to be like in the fall, but they're still trying to work all that stuff out. But I don't know if we'll be back. And currently the library I work at is closed. So
Right. And talk about a public space which would bring all people from all walks of life together. Libraries, are where you can have, any number of people together, researching things and coming across each other, where the only thing they have in common is that they need something from this space. And when those places are closed, we've recently in our community, I'm on the townwide COVID task force for the nonprofits. And it was brought to our attention that many of our folks without homes, who usually could go and hang out in the cold weather in the libraries or the coffee shops or, other places, those places are closed now. And so we were able to find a couple of sites that were willing to be open for a little while. But libraries have often been very hospitable to our homeless neighbors, and letting folks just kind of be together, and so you can experience that genuine sense of community, in that there are people from entirely different walks of life gathering together in one space. And those are the kinds of informal community building and bonding experiences that right now are not available to us. Everything has to be so thought through virtually. Lack of spontaneity, lack of just running into someone, striking up a conversation. Everything has to be so deliberate when you're online. And I think that that's another, way that we're losing that muscle of how to be together in community. I noticed earlier that Floyd's hand was up again. Floyd, did you have something else you wanted to share around this question?
Oh, no. Oh, thank
Oh,
you. It was
oh, okay.
yeah.
Maybe your hand was still up.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a community where they were involved with something that is now no longer possible in this COVID era, that you might like to share? Many of us here are in churches, right, who may not be meeting in person. And there's quite a lot of challenges for how to maintain congregations. For many of us, are our primary communities, where the one thing we might have in common is our love of the scripture tradition or the story or our religious practices or those kinds of things. And we can get those things through the screen to a certain extent, but we also are truly suffering from a lack of that kind of shared community fellowship. Does anyone have any observations they'd like to make about how it has felt for them? What has been a plus, what has been a minus, a challenge, in the way that our congregations have gone virtual?
Hi, Reverend Ann.
Hi, Hensley, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So, I'm, there are pluses and minuses for me with regard to what COVID-19, the situation we find ourselves in. For me, the minuses, of course, is that, I'm stuck at home most of the time. I'm quarantining. My wife and I are in the travel business, and we, of course, love to travel. And one of the things we can't do now is travel, leisurely. But I'm very encouraged because we are hearing from a lot of our customers, that some of whom we haven't heard from in years, who are chomping at the bit to get out to travel, to vacation, to take trips abroad. Now that there's a vaccine, and that's encouraging to me that people are chomping at the bit to do those things that they love to do. And so I'm encouraged that this community that we are missing, and the one that the young lady who spoke earlier talked about, that's not lost forever, that we are on timeout right now. And I'm encouraged to know that that's all it is, we're on timeout. But here's what I think is a plus for me, is for me, I've widened my community during COVID. I'm reaching out to people, and people are reaching out to me from places that I would never ordinarily be speaking to someone or having a Zoom meeting with. I've developed new friends. I've developed a wider community, if you will. People who are some of whom I'm now accountable to, and vice versa. And if it weren't for this COVID-19 situation, those situations may never have happened. And so I look at those in a positive sense, that these are, new relationships that I've built, new communities that I've now become a part of, that when post COVID-19, hopefully I'll get to see some of these individuals, be a part of these communities in a more personal way, but forever they will now be a part of my experience. And so I look at the very plus side of that as well.
That is very hopeful, and something I think maybe many of us have experienced. We are now in touch with people, or having people kind of join in on our worship services, or even in our personal life, people that maybe we hadn't had an opportunity to go see, that we are now regularly connected with. And I think that is a plus, and something for us to be thinking about. How can this virtual reality foster new kinds of community that didn't exist before? And I think that is hopeful, and something to hold on to. Chris Hall, you had your hand up. I'm sorry that I didn't see it. Please unmute yourself and share what you would like. Chris, are you there? Oh, Chris Hall, you're on mute. Did you have your hand up before? You're still on mute. I'm going to see if you can unmute yourself. Oh, no, hang on. Okay, I've just sent you a prompt to unmute yourself.
No, I got it.
There you go. Excellent.
Yes. Well, I just want to say hello to everyone. And I also want to say I'm taking this time to work on myself. I have always been deathly afraid of everybody. Everybody, deathly afraid of everybody. So what I'm doing during this COVID time is taking the time to work on myself and open up a lot more. One of the things I'm doing is I'm doing Toastmasters. And what that has allowed me to do is to create my own little community. And it also has helped me to be able to communicate with people who are totally different from myself. So I'm feeling wonderful. I'm feeling wonderful during this time of COVID, because I am enjoying my silence, and I am just working on myself and growing tremendously. So I have a new job, and it is absolutely wonderful. I'm working with the most wonderful people on the planet. And so far it's going really well, because I get to talk.
That is wonderful to hear. And,
yes.
And very, it's exciting to think that this, as Mr. Massop said, as Hensley said, if we think of it as a timeout and not as sort of a permanent isolation from each other, what are the ways that we can be cultivating our strengths so that when we come back together again, we maybe have developed some ways of living together or operating in the world that might be healthier. I think, Chris, I've known you for several years, and it's exciting to hear that you're in Toastmasters. My hat is off to you. Public speaking believe me, is a frightening prospect for just about every human being, right? Even those of us who do it for a living, I get major butterflies every Sunday morning, always did, always will. But one of the habits of the heart that Parker Palmer talks about is developing our own voice and our own agency.
Exactly.
That's one of the ways that we can participate in our democracy responsibly. And so the ability to articulate a message and to deliver it confidently in front of a group of people is a true asset to community building.
Yes, this is my first. Yes, I actually gave a 2.5 minute speech at Toastmasters. It was my first, and I thought I was going to die.
Congratulations.
I was in a state of panic, but what has happened is I realized my growth from yesterday. And that's what's so important to me, because again, As I mentioned earlier, I was deathly afraid of people who were totally different from myself. So now that I'm more comfortable with myself, I'm a lot more comfortable with people who are totally different from myself.
That
Yes.
is some profound stuff, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing. That is some serious personal growth.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. To build off of Chris's experience and Hensley's as well, has anyone else experienced something during COVID that has actually lent to their sense of either strengthening community or strengthening their skills to be in community when we do come back together? And I'm going to try and make sure I don't miss anybody whose hand might be up. And if I do, just unmute yourself and jump in. I think we're just going to stay together for our remaining time. Anyone? Oh, okay, Carolina, I see you up there. Please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, well, I want to mention that, yes, I do appreciate Zoom communities. I think a lot of people came together internationally, and I see it in, I'm affiliated with different parts of spirituality. Part of my spirituality is affiliation with more the yoga world and the devotional paths. With all the chanting and such. And so I've seen people come together from internationally for study and sharing. And that's definitely a positive thing. I'm currently going through the One Spirit seminary. And so one thing, seminary or not, retreats are bust. No retreats. We can't go out together and whatever, experience silence or meditation or prayer. So that's a huge gap. Just like theater, all the retreats. That's pretty big one. So for our seminary, everyone was looking forward to the end of year retreat where we get to kind of like a culmination of the ordination training for ordination, and then the beautiful ceremony in Riverside Church on Upper West Side in New York, where it was just gigantic, gorgeous ceremony, and that all is canceled, second year in a row. So that's a big one, and so we're hoping to get together once. We are allowed to do that with another year. So when other people are graduating, we're going to kind of get together and maybe participate in the ceremony in some way. But yeah, we're going to just get the paperwork and do a Zoom retreat. Okay, good, you're ordained. So that's a huge, huge difference. Imagine, first communion or something important, threshold, confirmation, or some kind of sacrament, and it's what used to be in the atmosphere. So I think that's the biggest thing. I relate to what you're saying, and that it's that ripeness of the energy in the room that like we were speaking with my group participant Michelle, the synergy. So we're trying through Zoom, and on one hand we opened up international gatherings, on the other hand it's that feeling each other in the room. It may open our senses. We're feeling each other through the distance. So that's like a new skill. So that's definitely positive. The new skill of seeing, I'm seeing the faces now in the little boxes, and I'm definitely reaching out with my energy and with my heart. So we're learning something there, but I hope we're going to have both sides after we get everybody vaccinated and so on. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about life post this intense COVID period. What will it be like when we come back together? Will we be a hybrid world? Will we take perhaps the best of what is possible online and keep that going? But at the same time, I hope have a much greater appreciation and love for what it feels like for people to come together in real time, in real space, to once again have experience those kind of spontaneous conversations and friendships that arise, the way that we learn from each other when we collaborate in a room, awkward silences that can be the most fruitful things, while when you're together, all of those things which are very challenging on a flattened screen. And yet at the same time, I think someone mentioned earlier, there's an accessibility to this. I think Allison mentioned it with even sort of the cost of entertainment, certainly the ability for people to show up at things. We're in a snow cycle this month, right? Where it seems like every 3 days we're hit by another snowstorm. There would have been all kinds of this, quite possibly would have been canceled. I know there's snow coming up tonight. There's all kinds of things that when we were always dependent on being together in physical space that could be vulnerable too. Events canceled for reasons of weather that now won't be. We do have this as a tool. My concern is like in so many ways we become over reliant on it because it's easier in some ways than actually coming together with people and working through the messiness of human problem solving and being together and learning how to talk to each other in person. All of those things which are so foundational for how to be the kind of community that a thriving democracy is based on. And those kinds of voluntary associations where we learn how to be good citizens. And I don't mean a civics lesson, but I mean, how do you debate civilly? How do you exchange ideas? How do you listen to each other? Those are all the cornerstones for a democracy. And I think that in lots of ways, they're lost art for many of us. We have just a few minutes before we close. I'd just like to open the floor to anyone who has any final thoughts or comments about anything we talked about the kind of habits of the heart that we need to develop, about the different ways our hearts can break, one that can create deeper community and one that can prevent it. Anything people would like to share? Stella.
Reverend, you just said something that I wanted to say just a couple of minutes ago, that what I have learned, and it's difficult, really difficult, is I think I'm learning to be a better listener and someone who can speak, to think before I speak, and give the other person that I'm speaking with the benefit of the doubt. Because I'm always on the edge of losing my mind. I really am. I mean, I really am. I just don't know how to speak to some people anymore. I just can't do it. But I'm trying, because there is no other way forward other than to be able to talk to one another. So that's what I'm learning. And I miss church very much.
We miss you too.
Yeah, but that for me is, because I was very afraid that, that society is breaking apart and we can't talk to each other anymore. And I was part of the problem, because again, I'm losing my mind every 5 minutes, and instead of speaking, I'm angry, and that's not helping. That's not helping. So
thank you, Stella. Thank you so much.
Suppress the anger.
Yeah.
So Ann, Ted O'Galley.
Yes. Hello, Ted.
This goes back a little ways in the conversation already. When I was younger, much younger, 5th grade, my parents made that big step where they left the city and moved to the suburbs. And as kids, we were just so excited about that, because here we're going into this grass instead of the asphalt. We didn't understand what was going on. We went to class the first day, my brother and I was in class. And now this is a real oddity, because we're identical twins, and my mom insisted that we had to wear the same clothes.
Oh, God.
So the teacher brought us up to the front of the classroom, made us introduce ourselves, and Then she asked the question, where are you from? So my brother and I looked at each other and we said, we're from Jersey City. And she said, no, where are you from? We stumbled around a little bit, and then we finally said, New Jersey. And no, where are you from? We said, the United States. And she got frustrated. And she said, go home and talk to your parents and find out where you're from. And we failed the first day. We hadn't even, there wasn't even, it was a pop quiz, and we just lost it right there. So we had to go home, and at the ripe age of the 5th grade, we had to discover what our ancestry was. And so many times we make that part of the conversation, where we're from and all, instead of asking somebody, how are you? And what can I do to help you out? And how do you integrate people together and so that they can talk easier? And I admire the woman who was just talking and that other gentleman who went to Toastmasters, because they're learning how to use the language and not to embarrass somebody else by saying, where are you from? And stuff like that. So congratulations to both of you and to the rest of you for coming to this kind of a program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Where
You
am I-
know, we the way in which we try and categorize each other from the beginning, rather than letting us decide how we are going to share ourselves with the world. And when you hear teachers doing that in the classroom with children, it is particularly heartbreaking. But I think that there's been so much great wisdom shared this evening around what it really does take to, not create community in the abstract, but what is our responsibility as individual members of a society to bring our best and our most open selves, to learn from each other, to imagine new ways of doing things, to take in all different kinds of viewpoints, and learn how to talk. And Stella, I love that you have learned to listen better. That is something that is really for all of us to do. I think we are often a culture of people who talk first, think next, and listen almost never. And how different things could be in terms of how we could come across these divides and really hear each other, and what is the common heartbreak that we share, that part that Parker Palmer talks about, hearts being broken open. What that enables you to do is recognize heartbreak in each other, and recognize how that is such a shared human experience, that if that can't bond us together, what can? And so to see communities that arise out of shared heartbreak can be some of the most powerful and lasting communities that there can be. And a lot of that is just admitting our humanity, our vulnerability, and allowing our hearts to become larger and stronger through it. Well, we are just about at 9 o'clock now, so I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Singleton, who I'm sure is going to let us know who's speaking next time. But thank you all so much for coming out and sharing this evening with me. I'm so grateful for your great participation, and as always, for the honor of being a part of this, Pastor Singleton.
Thank you, Pastor Ann, for sharing with us in this, our second engagement of our 7th Interfaith and Ecumenical series of studies. If we were together, I would ask you all to give each other a warm round of affirmation and love
we can
for
take
sustaining this.
We'll give
For sustaining this. This movement arose after what happened in Ferguson, in which we saw a community that was greatly divided. And here in Montclair, we have so much diversity. And so it was essential that we come together and learn how to be a cohesive community and cross our boundaries and connect with our sisters and brothers in mosques, synagogues, as well as in Christian sanctuaries. So we are grateful for this time together and for this important conversation, even as we gather during an impeachment trial to talk about the fragility of our democracy. I was surprised that that didn't come up it's
Maybe
so
that was
much.
on purpose. We just
Yeah,
have a
maybe
little oasis away from it for a minute.
maybe we've had too much looking at videotapes that have just been daunting and horrific. I did want to share with you, Pastor Ann, that there's a woman that I was talking to who's a teacher in Montclair, and she's struggling with the courage to what is a courageous stance to come together and to acquiesce and yield to demand and pressure to come into the school system and teach when we know that the ventilation system may not be appropriate, or to take the courageous stance to say, I will not return back and continue to do virtual learning. So right here in our township, as our children are suffering in social isolation and want to be together, and the township struggles with how to create those conditions that keeps everybody safe, especially with pre-existing conditions. What you talk about today is a very important conversation.
I had that situation on my heart actually when I was thinking about how do we hold tensions together creatively, because there's desire for good on all sides of that conversation, right? Everyone wants what is best, but everyone also wants what is safest, right? Physically safest for the teachers and administrative staff, developmentally best for the children. And sometimes those things are in competition with each other. How do we hold it together and still maintain our bonds of community?
And when it becomes a lawsuit and it hits the news, then it takes on a whole nother level where it's not being solved internally and external pressure is being exerted to try to bring about a result that's not coming in an organic way. And so we are a people of prayer, and we lift up our children in Montclair, as well as the teachers who are struggling with this very difficult circumstance that we find ourselves in this pandemic. So thank you, Pastor Ralowski, for our second time of getting together. This is always your time prior to Ash Wednesday.
I always get this one.
So we pray that all of us who observe Ash Wednesday will have a blessed time as we quickly come to that. The next time that we come together on Wednesday, February the 17th, another friend of this community who's been with us for several times, and she was with us earlier this evening, Professor Janine Hill-Fletcher from the Fordham University, will come with a very intriguing topic, Across at the Capitol, reclaiming with the long history of Christian nationalism and thinking a way forward. What I enjoy is that we are engaging in conversations that matter, things that are surfacing within our community, and that our Quran, our Bible, and also the Torah are relevant to speak to the issues of the day. We just need people to rightly divide the word of truth and to be expositors to help us to make our sacred scriptures relevant and user-friendly so that we can be a collective voice. So thank you, Pastor Ann. Thank you, each of you, for being a part of our sharing today. And we are people on the move, and word and in deed. And we look forward to coming together on next Wednesday. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Pastor Ann, to close us out. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So let us join our hearts together for a blessing as we probably don't have any place to go when we're done with this, but we're going to be leaving our time together. And so we'll take another deep breath as we center ourselves in the presence of God. Holy One, we are so grateful for this time of coming together, for the ways in which you speak through us and to us and lead us forward into deeper communion with you and with one another. We ask your blessing upon all who are on this call tonight. May they find rest this evening. May their hearts not be troubled. May their minds be stilled. May your presence infuse all that they do and say. And until we are together again, may we be held in your love and protective care. We pray this in your many names. Amen.